Welcome to the Morse Johnson Letter Home series. This is the 13-part video series where we at the museum read the letters written home by Sergeant Morse Johnson. Now, Sergeant Morse Johnson is a very interesting character, but first let's talk a little bit about some of the letters that he wrote. There were literally books worth of letters written home by Morse Johnson, and we pared that down to 18 of which we think are really good looks into the individual daily private life of the soldier in World War II Europe. Morse Johnson himself never intended for these letters to become part of the public record. However, his family felt very different. Now, what makes these letters so unique in particular is who the person Morse Johnson is. He was a very articulate, well-written, well-spoken person. So his letters are just a treasure in terms of their command of the English language and how he was able to convey his emotions. Morse Johnson was a Harvard-trained attorney. He was an attorney for the War Department prior to enlisting. Yes, he actually left an attorney's position in Washington, D.C. in order to enlist and become part of the fighting war effort. He was a Cornell undergrad and, as mentioned, a Harvard-trained attorney. He actually appeared in front of the Supreme Court, a case he won, by the way, and Justice Earl Warren personally commended him on his efforts in that case. Part of what makes this letter collection so valuable is the fact that they were never intended for publication, and in fact, they were intended for a private audience only. And what that means is we get a real good first-hand look at the emotions and the cares, the likes and dislikes of an individual soldier during World War II Europe. So this is very unique in that sense, where you're reading what was intended for family members only. So it's real, it's unfiltered, it's raw, it's emotional. So it's a great first-hand look, not intended for public, but intended for a private audience. Now you get to be part of that private audience, and it's invaluable in that sense. Because these are private, unfiltered, uncensored letters, you get that first-hand look, and you get to ask yourself the honest questions of, how is this person coping? How do you think you would have coped? What are the emotions? Would this have been written differently if it was intended for a public audience? How do you think Morse Johnson today would feel knowing that his family said, publish these, we need to have this as part of the record? Interestingly, the subject himself, Morse Johnson, was a very dynamic character. He was an attorney, he was civically engaged, and he was a war hero. He was all of those things at the same time. His volunteer accomplishments are almost too numerous to count. He was the trustee of the Shakespeare-Oxford Society. He was a candidate for both Congress and City Council within the city of Cincinnati, Ohio. He was a political party delegate at the national level. He was on the Committee of World Affairs. He was appointed personally by the governor of Ohio to be on the committees for higher education and judicial selection at the state level. And he was also legal counsel for the War Production Board. While he was legal counsel for the War Production Board, Morse Johnson voluntarily resigned from an attorney's position working for the government so that he could enlist and be on the front lines. That's a huge aspect of his personal story. This was a gentleman who did not need to do what he did, but that's who Morse Johnson is. He was a civically engaged, volunteer-oriented person who gave back to his community at every opportunity he could, whether it would be at the city level of Cincinnati, the state level of Ohio, or at the federal level as a war hero and somebody who appeared in front of the Supreme Court. He gave back at every opportunity. And now we're honored to read his letters, the private letters that show a raw and unfiltered look into the day in Europe. Lastly, we'd like to thank the Morse Johnson family themselves. Through their generosity in donating a private collection of letters, we as a public can benefit. We now have a first-hand look into what life was like for an American soldier in World War II in Europe. And it's not just about Morse Johnson. It can be assumed that this is what it was like for many soldiers. Thank you to Morse Johnson for his volunteerism and civic duty, and thank you to the Morse Johnson family for donating this private collection for public use.